Welcome, welcome to Tantra Unveiled, Part 2. So in the last class, we covered mainly history and a little bit of the philosophy, mostly in terms of what the purpose of the practice is, and a little bit of a roadmap of the journey that we go on as a result of doing that practice. So now we'll go deeper into what this path actually looks and feels like as we journey along it. Of course, nothing can substitute for simply walking the path and experiencing it for yourself. But if for those who are just learning more about what original Tantra really is, this can be extremely useful. And for those who've done some practice, this can help illuminate that practice and the experiences that they've had. So first of all, one more brief historical note. I said in the last class that essentially there's not really any such thing as tantric sex in the original tradition, in the sense that there are no sexual techniques taught in any tantra or in any commentary on any tantra. In the entire tradition. It's simply not what they were interested in. In fact, sexual techniques and enhancing sexual pleasure has its place, and there's another class of literature different from the tantric literature called Kama Shastra. Its most famous work is the Kama Sutra, and the purpose of that is to maximize sexual pleasure. And this was considered a completely different body of literature from the Tantras. So having said that, of course, it is also the case that there were sexual meditations taught in some original tantric sources. They were not any part of the mainstream of the tradition at all, but they certainly were there. And these meditations were properly meditations. Like I said, they didn't involve any sexual techniques per se. They involved what you do with your awareness while making love in order to sort of take full advantage of the opening and the energy that's generated in that act, in that experience. So, for example, in Tantra Loka, Abhinavagupta, who I mentioned last class, is one of the foremost authorities in the history of Tantra. He does teach in quite a bit of detail a sexual meditation, and it's extremely esoteric. It's considered an advanced practice for someone who's already mastered all the basic practices of the tradition. And indeed, it's not something that you could just do. It involves, among other things, I would say probably the primary thing it focuses on after all the preliminary practices are done is this whole thing of merging all the chakras into one. So actually, as I said, the tradition had a more fluid view of the energy body than the West often does. And there's this possibility, very rare experience, apparently, of having all the chakras actually move and merge into a single chakra. And then that chakra sort of grows and you become a single mass of blissful awareness. And anyway, so that's more or less at the center of that sexual meditation that's taught. Of course, this can on rare occasions happen spontaneously, and he's teaching in that text a bunch of practices that make it more possible and that sort of lead up to it, including pranayamas and mantras and ritual acts and visualizations and so on. But that particular text has not been translated into English, or rather it has been translated, but extremely poorly, I'm afraid to say, and not in such a way that you could actually follow the instructions. And that was only translated recently, very recently. So the what's taught under the name tantric sex in America for many decades now does not come from that source. It in fact doesn't come from any Sanskrit source or any Indian source that I'm aware of. That doesn't make it invalid or illegitimate per se. Anything is legitimate that helps people. So it's just that it doesn't have a root in the original Indian tradition. The great majority, if not all, of what's taught under the name tantric sex then is not actually tantric. Now, of course, many teachers, modern American teachers of neo-tantra or tantric sex, at least are informed by somewhat of the worldview and aesthetic of the original tantric tradition. But there's no direct connection that scholars have been able to establish. So how did this come about then? Well, it came about through hearsay. People in the West sort of heard about this tantric tradition that included sexuality among everything else as a part of one's spiritual path. Because in Tantra, everything becomes part of the spiritual path. So in original Tantra, there's no more tantric sex than there is tantric eating, tantric sleeping, tantric walking down the street. Because any act can be an act of awareness. Any act can express pure presence and unconditional love for what is. So any act can be part of the spiritual path, and in that sense is a part of Tantra. And sexuality was not singled out especially in the texts that we have on sensual meditations. Of course, meditation on the orgasmic experience is mentioned, along with meditation on allowing a chocolate to dissolve on your tongue, or meditation on jogging, or meditation on sitting still, and many other things. Meditation on getting a foot rub. I mean, those are actual things that are all mentioned in this 9th century or 10th century Sanskrit text we have on sensual meditation. But we see that sexuality is not singled out there or anywhere else in the tradition as deserving special attention. So I do think that in America especially, and in the West in general, the focus on this is a kind of the usual kind of disproportional view when it comes to something which is titillating or prurient for people. Not that I have anything against sex, mind you. I'm just trying to be historically accurate to how the tradition represented itself. And, by the way, it sort of all started, and I don't want to go too far down this road because it gets really, it's a rabbit hole, but it sort of all started with this fellow, Pierre Bernard. And there's Pierre Bernard around the turn of the century, and around 1905, he became the first person in the West to teach something like tantric sex, and that is to say, a form. Well, he had met a Bengali man who knew something of the yogic tradition and the tantric tradition, and so Pierre Bernard reinvented this, starting in San Francisco in 1905. Surprise, surprise. And he, used it for his own advantage. That is to say, he propagated a notion of tantric sex so that he could sleep with most of his female students. And so that began a long and ignominious tradition in America. And so, he's the one that historically we look to as or scholars identify as the source for the idea of tantric sex in the modern West. And you could read a lot more about him in a book called the Omnipotent, which is his biography, and it's really quite a wonderful piece of journalism that's really well researched. So I'll not say anything more about that. You can look into it for yourself. And there's some really good articles. There's a really good article on this topic of 20th century neo-tantra, or, this, I don't even know what to call it, but there's a really good article on it by Hugh Urban. If you want to look that up, it's cited in the back of my book. So that was just to answer some people's questions about this, the connection or lack thereof between these two things. Western Neo-Tantra and the original Tantric tradition, which, as I said, if you want to know what it looks like, you get a hint just by looking at Tibetan Buddhism, which is thoroughly Tantric. Of course, it has something of its own aesthetic too, a little bit of a different flavor than is present in other Tantric paths. And it's become highly institutionalized because it's been, I don't want to say co-opted, but it kind of has, by the monastic establishment in Tibet, and in the hands of monks became a little bit more rigid or institutionalized than it otherwise was or would be. So, but still, Tibetan Buddhism is Tantric Buddhism, and that's where, you can just get more of a flavor of what original Tantra was really all about. Now, having said that, Shaiva Tantra, which is my specialty, is quite different from Tibetan Buddhism or Tantric Buddhism because it includes quite a bit more of a devotional element or a bhakti element. So Shaiva Tantra, it just, there's more of a kind of love of God element or concept in the tradition, even in the non-dualist camps. So that is to say, if you're a dualist, you believe God is separate from you, even though your soul is absolutely equal to God. Still, God is a separate being in the dualist tradition. And there's prayer and there's worship and there's poetry and devotional poetry and so on. And for the non-dualists, though, many of those elements still remained, even though they didn't believe in any separate deity. So, as a non-dualist, what does it mean to compose devotional poetry? The poet Utpaladeva said, and I'm very roughly paraphrasing, "O Lord, I am nothing but you. You are nothing but me in my essence. But let me pretend to be separate from you so I can experience the sweetness of love for you." So that actually makes perfect sense from a non-dual view. Like if you love someone else, another human being, very deeply, if you can really love another human being unconditionally, that is divine love. And that other being is nothing but you in another form. But isn't it delightful that you exist in this other form to love and adore and appreciate? So if that is possible, of course you can have a relationship with God even as a non-dualist, just like you can have a relationship with another person as a non-dualist. And if you truly realize the truth of non-duality, then you really don't experience that other person as anything separate from you, but they're embodying a different aspect of you than what the one you call you is embodying. And therefore there's delight in perceiving that and playing with that, if that makes sense. So yes, there was devotional poetry in the non-dualist tantric tradition. And the best example of that is probably Utpaladeva's Shiva Stotravali, a garland of hymns to Shiva. And Utpaladeva was a radical non-dualist, total non-dualist, and yet he has these devotional hymns to the one that he experiences as non-separate from himself. After all, you could write a devotional hymn in praise of your own being, couldn't you? In praise of yourself? Why not try that? That sounds like a great idea, actually. Okay, so that's to clarify just a couple of points that were sort of left over from the previous talk. And now we'll get into the details of this talk. So I'll just remind you, we'll go back to our handouts. And I'll just remind you, we had this goal triangle, and that the Tantric tradition is oriented towards these three goals, or rather two, because the top two are aspects of one single process. Awakening to what you really are and becoming free of what you're not. That is to say, becoming free of identification with your stories, your interpretations of reality, your self-images, your ego, and then also the goal of enjoyment. They're subordinated but still very much present in the Tantric tradition, unlike other yogic traditions. And then we talked about the 3 stages of awakening: awakening to, or immersing in, your essence nature, your absolute center, the core of your being, your soul, if you will. And then awakening to the unity of your essence nature with the pattern of the whole. So dissolving any trace of apparent separation. That's Shakta Samavesha, the second stage there. And then beyond that, immersing into realizing that you are indeed not only all that is manifest, but all that is unmanifest, the field of absolute potential, which is, sort of conceptualized as a great infinite void, but a void which is paradoxically full of presence and full of potentiality. So it's the radiant void, as the mystics call it, the resounding silence. And so that's the really non-conceptualizable third stage of awakening. And then, of course, beyond these, there is the secret of a 4th stage, which is not a 4th stage, because it's just the coalescence of all 3 in a single experience, as opposed to any one of the 3 dominating your experience. So how then does one move through these stages of awakening and have this deeper experience of your true nature? Well, this is done through practice. And in the tradition, we could say, and this is not an explicit classification in the early tradition, but I think it's a very useful classification to look at the practices of the whole tradition with. And that is dividing the practices into 2 basic categories, which is Shiva and Shakti. Now, again, anthropomorphically, mythologically, Shiva and Shakti are depicted as a god and a goddess, mates, partners, a married couple even. And this is all, of course, actually metaphor. And the deeper meaning of Shiva and Shakti in the old days was only revealed once you took initiation into the tantric path. Before initiation, you would hear the stories and, the mythology, and Shiva and Shakti, and they had a baby and he lost his head and he got a new head, and that's Ganesh. And they had another baby that it sort of didn't really have, but they ended up having him. That's Skanda or Kartikeya. Anyway, all these mythological stories. And then you would get initiated if you proved your readiness, your adhikara, your readiness for initiation. You would prove it by that you had a real spiritual longing, that you really wanted to do this practice, that you were serious about knowing the truth, and that you had your heart was opening and you had devotional feeling. So that was the usual sort of standard by which it was judged that you were ready for initiation. And then after initiation, you would be told, this is like the prestige, the reveal. Shiva and Shakti aren't really gods, that hang out in Shiva Loka, some heaven. They are actual symbolic representations of fundamental principles of reality. And the real nature of Shiva is consciousness or awareness, specifically wide open, spacious awareness, wide open, spacious, yet grounded awareness. And Shakti means energy, specifically patterned flows of energy. So when we see the depiction of Shiva and Shakti as a couple in conjugal union, a couple making love, that is supposed to be symbolic of the fact that when energy and awareness come together, then they give birth, as it were, to the whole universe. And that's only one level of the symbolism. It's also that when energy and awareness come together in our spiritual practice, we experience the bliss of knowing the truth. And so that's why the image of the sexual union became big. And this is another source for, by the way, the misunderstanding of the Tantric tradition, is that Shiva and Shakti are depicted in sexual union, which is supposed to indicate to the practitioner who's initiated that when you bring awareness and energy to both into your practice in a balanced way, you do experience the bliss that is the natural byproduct of knowing the truth of your own being. So when awareness awareness and energy work together in harmony in your spiritual practice, it's very powerful, because awareness serves to clarify and give definition and direction to the energy. And energy serves to juicify awareness. So in other words, if you were to, Shiva practices are practices that invite you into stillness and silence, openness, stillness, and silence. And so meditation, when meditation is not a technique, but simply dissolving into pure being, is a Shiva practice. And Shakti practices, by contrast, are working with energy. So energy body work and various kinds of healing work can be Shakti practices. The physical postures of yoga, pranayamas, visualizations, all these are Shakti practices. So Shakti practices build more energy in your total body-mind system, and Shiva practices bring you into stillness and silence in the ground of being. So as you might imagine then, if you do mostly or only Shiva type practice, you can become very still and very peaceful and very silent, and also eventually very sort of dried out and desiccated and fragile in a certain sense. So the image of the person who meditates too much is very much that of a fragile little old man with a beard, whereas the image of someone who does a lot of Shakti practices is more along the lines of a martial artist or a warrior or a very embodied being, a very powerful dancer, maybe. So I'm just kind of give visual images that express this. And what becomes obvious when we consider the practices of the tradition, these two primary camps, Shiva and Shakti, is that when we do too much Shiva practice, we're still, but we're also in a certain sense rather empty. And too much Shakti practice is you get super energized, but without that ground of stillness and silence, you can burn out, or you can over push yourself, overdrive yourself, or worse still, the Shakti, the power of the yogic practices can serve to magnify your ego and magnify your egoic delusions. And that's less of a problem. It happens much more rarely if you're also doing the Shiva practice, which grounds you into the stillness and silence, which is very humbling, because when you really drop into the great stillness, it's so vast, and your little sense of self is such a tiny drop in that infinite ocean. It's deeply humbling, and it's less likely then that the Shakti generated in yogic practice will inflate your egoic delusions. So this is rather important within the tradition. We see that, Shakti practices that generate energy in the body-mind system will serve to magnify whatever's already there. They'll turn a good person into a force for good in this world, a saint, you might say, and they'll turn a jerk into an even bigger jerk. It happens. So that's why balance in the practice is necessary for it to be a benefit to you and all beings. So a balance of Shiva and Shakti practices, again, the cultivation of awareness, stillness, and silence on the one hand serves to clarify, lend definition, and beneficial direction to the energy. And the cultivation of the energy serves to enliven, or as I said, juicify awareness. So they're so complementary, so beautifully complementary, and that's the image of the symbolic image of Shiva and Shakti in conjugal union. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what these practices are. So in Shiva practices, we can say are basically just three: meditation, contemplation, and inquiry. Now, meditation, all three of these actually can be Shakti practices if you're doing them in a Shakti way. Because Shiva, Bhav, that aspect of things is very subtle. So the Shiva form of meditation is simply relaxing into pure being. So in this kind of meditation, there's no technique involved. It's simply letting all things, just leaving all things to their natural functioning, not pursuing anything, not pushing anything away, just relaxing and letting everything just be as it is, until you just drop into this profound stillness and silence, so deep that not the loudest noise could disturb it. So the great meditation teacher Adyashanti writes about this in his book, True Meditation. And that true meditation, though he doesn't use tantric terminology, it is totally a description of meditation of the Shiva variety. What he's calling true meditation is just in tantric tradition, the more Shiva variety of meditation. As opposed to meditations that utilize techniques, because as long as there's a technique, as long as there's a doing, then it's a Shakti practice. And that's all good, right? Because we want both. And in fact, meditation with technique can and should usually precede meditation without technique, because the technique-less meditation of relaxing into pure being somehow happens much more effectively when preceded by the techniques that I'm, that are taught in classes all over the world, whether it's focusing on your breath, becoming aware of your body, concentrating on the point between the eyebrows, visualizing a light within you. There's just infinite, just so many meditation techniques. And this again is the complementarity of Shiva and Shakti. When you do the meditation techniques first and then let yourself just relax into pure being, into the stillness and silence, somehow you're able to relax much more effectively, much deeper when you invite that after you've done those techniques. So actually doing in this kind of yogic way can lead us to undoing, can make possible the deeper undoing, which is the true meditation or the Shiva state, as it were. Not that it's a state, really. And that's important, actually, that you're not trying to attain a particular state of consciousness in meditation, because if you are, you're still doing. To relax into pure being, you have to stop trying to attain any particular state. You really even have to stop being a meditator, meaning to say you have to let go of the self-image, of a mental image of the practice, or what the practice should look like, or what you expect it to look like. All that has to just be released. Easier said than done, perhaps. Still, to do a meditation with technique and then not let go of the technique and let yourself just be is like making a meal and then not eating it. That in just being, that's where the fruit gels, as it were. It's a bit of a mixed metaphor. The result is able to show up. That's what I mean. So also in the Shiva side, I mentioned inquiry. Now inquiry, when it's kind of thinking something through, is a Shakti practice. But it can be a Shiva practice when it's simply asking a question that leaves you in silence. So the famous example from Ramana Maharshi is simply asking, what am I? Or what is it that is behind this word I? What do I mean when I say the word I? in the simplest form, the best form, that's the most effective form in English, is certainly just what am I, or what is me. And for it to be a Shiva practice, you ask the question without seeking an answer in words. You just ask the question and let yourself experience the answer, which might be a perfect blank or stillness or silence, and that is the answer. A lot of people, they ask the question, what am I? And they just draw a blank and they don't realize that that's the answer. That is stillness and silence. You just haven't come to fully appreciate it or experience its depth yet, if it just feels like a blank, boring, Go deeper into that blank moment, and there's an ocean of stillness. So, as inquiry, inquiry can also be inquiring into the root of anything. So let's say a certain feeling or a thought is coming up. If you just ask yourself, where is this arising from? Which is a different question, by the way, from why am I having this feeling, right? Because then that leads us into self-analysis. Why am I having this feeling? Oh, it's because my mother was mean to me when I was 5. No, we're not talking about that. And that might have its place. But here we're talking about sort of feeling into the depths of your being. Where is the emotion? Where are all the emotions? Where are the thoughts arising from? And you find they're arising from this space of pure nothingness or pure presence. Same thing. So just feeling into the root. Where is this arising from? Or where is it dissolving to? When a thought goes, when it disappears, where is it dissolving to? That's much harder for most people, because as soon as you kind of look to see where it goes, usually what happens is they give the thought a little energy and it comes back up again. But it's fundamentally the same thing. Where is it arising from? Where is it dissolving to? That inquiry, leads you down. It leads you into the great stillness, the great silence. Contemplation is the same thing, but using a sutra or a spiritual teaching from the tradition, and just asking yourself, what does this feel like, or what is at the root of it, or where does it arise from within me? Contemplation, again, is one of those practices that can be done in a Shakti way or a Shiva way. So when you let the sutra lead you beyond itself into a space of pure presence, that's the Shiva practice. So there's not many Shiva practices. In fact, there's really only one in a few variations. And then there's hundreds of thousands of Shakti practices. And that's exactly the nature of things. There's one ground of being, one formless absolute, and then there's a million diverse manifestations. But the point is, the realization that we're invited to is in the non-dual tradition, is Shiva is Shakti. Shakti is Shiva in another form. In the Buddhist tradition, in the Heart Sutra, they said the same thing in these words: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So the realization that you have ultimately, and this is a fairly kind of an advanced realization, is that all form, all expression, all manifestation is an expression of the formless absolute. The pregnant nothingness that underlies all things and interpenetrates all things is constantly expressing itself in infinite forms. And even those infinite, well, we don't know if the manifest universe is infinite from the point of view of physics, right? There's a current debate about this, and it's very possible that the universe is just very, very, very large and not actually infinite. And that would make sense in light of the Tantric tradition, which says that all manifestation, it forms just a tiny, tiny part of the field of absolute potential. And it would be, if it was infinite, it would be hard to say that, I guess. Anyway, I digress. These talks are spontaneous. Hope you don't mind. So, Shakti practices, countless Shakti practices, just like there's countless kinds of beings. But what forms do they primarily take? I'll tell you. Practices that work with the body, practices that work with the energy body, and practices that work with the mind. So now all three of these are actually on a continuum. They're not three separate things. There's a continuum. The energy body actually is the mind in its more extended sense, in its fuller sense, as it interpenetrates and interrelates with the physical body. And there's no, in this tradition, there's not a mind-body connection. There's a spectrum, a crossfade, as it were, which is much stronger than just connection, if you see what I mean. Just as we might say that the mind is the subtlest part of the body likewise is simply the most tangible manifestation of the mind. So it's a perfect continuum in that sense. So having said that, in the Tantric tradition, the idea is that our minds are programmed with our cultural and social and psychological conditioning, and that this conditioning is so kind of dense that it forms a veil or obscuration so that we're not able to recognize our true nature, even though our true nature is expressing itself all the time. It's right in front of you all the time. I mean, not literally, because your true nature, I mean, is the source from which you see. It can't be seen as an object, right? But it's right in front of you all the time in the sense that it's constantly manifesting or expressing itself, and yet it's not recognized exactly for what it is because of the denseness of this mental conditioning. So what do we do to work with that density? Well, we do practices like Vikalpakshaya, which means dissolving your stories. And this is a great kind of tantric practice of destabilizing your accepted interpretation of reality, and so that you can see that even though you can find evidence for your beliefs, you can also find evidence for every contrary belief, and therefore beliefs can't capture reality. They can't represent reality, no matter how intricate or nuanced they get. So we have a teacher here in the modern era, alive today, who teaches this practice. She's not trained in the Tantric tradition, but she does teach Vikalpakshaya, dissolution of story. And that is Byron Katie, who, just intuitively kind of developed a method of working with and dissolving your stories and beliefs about reality, which is very aligned with the Tantric tradition, even though she didn't source it from that tradition. So Vikalpakshaya, dissolution of your mental constructs or interpretations of reality, realizing that no interpretation of reality has any special priority, because for every story you can come up with and find evidence for, you can find evidence for all the opposites as well. So they all equally might capture some fragment of truth, but none of them are strictly true as an interpretation. So that's an important example of a Shakti practice where you're working with the mind and you're kind of working the mind through a process which allows it to let go a little bit. But even more prominent in the original Tantric tradition is visualization practice, where you visualize, well, there's many kinds of visualization practices, but in deity yoga, you visualize the deity that you're working with, and again, in the non-dual version, as an expression of your own essence nature. And you visualize all these, do this whole elaborate mental worship where you're kind of worshiping this deity who is, of course, again, your essence. And you are doing this elaborate mental worship all in your head. And a lot of detail has to be put into this. Why? Because the tradition suggests you spend most of your time just cycling through habitual conditioned thought patterns. And what you need to do is give your mind something else to focus on, and let that focal point be something that shifts the paradigm within the mind and imagination. So instead of using your imagination to imagine possible futures to chase after or to be afraid of, you use that same power of imagination to enter the divine world, as it were, to visualize, these deities and so on, which were, of course, in the original tradition, were embedded within a cultural context, which gave them kind of meaning in life that we don't have as much access to if you grew up in a totally different culture, right? But still, the principle is sound, which is to divert the enormous mental energy that you put into worry and anxiety and fantasy, and take that mental energy and direct it towards your awakening. So, in other words, the visualization practices were asanas for the mind, and were absolutely crucial to the tradition. And I in a certain sense, to not have them, to be doing asanas only of the body and not the mind, is basically not going to work from the tantric tradition. It's not going to produce the fruit that you're going for if you're going for awakening / liberation. So, of course, also visualization practice involving your own energy body. So that I mentioned in the last class, the idea of the energy body with its chakras, energy centers, its nadis or channels, and a whole variety of kind of, the energy body is like visualized as a complexification of light. It's a light body. And all the structures of the energy body are made of pure energy. They're made of light and different colors and shades, and there's all this kind of wonderful detail you can get into. And that allows you to start to tune into where you're holding perhaps traumas or old pain or rigidity in your system. It starts to become more apparent to you. You want to find that before it manifests on the physical body level. When it manifests on the physical body level, it's already really, really deeply implanted in you, So, theoretically anyway, in the tantric tradition, you could, most people could maintain perfect health by being so intimate with their energy body that they feel a kind of imbalance there way before it shows up in the physical body, because the energy body is the template, as it were, for the physical body. So much more could be said about this. So a lot of practices that might seem inherently meaningless at first to people who, didn't grow up in this in the culture which gave rise to Tantra, can be seen to have a lot of deep meaning as you kind of explore the tradition a lot more. So one example, just to give an example of a classical tantric practice, is Bhuta Shuddhi, and that means the purification and recalibration of the elements. So the 5 primary elements, earth, water, fire, wind, space, are visualized within the human body. And there's this whole practice of you visualize the earth element, in this case as a golden yellow cube, and then that earth element, you visualize it dissolving upward into the water element, and you visualize that dissolving upward into the fire element, fire into wind, wind into space, space into essence, as you do a mantra with each stage. And some people do specific mudras as well. And this is the heart of tantric yoga. The coming together of mantra, mudra, visualization. So mantra is mantra synchronized with breath, of course. Mudra is a physical gesture or posture, and visualization. So the imagination is engaged with the practice too. All parts of you are engaged, in other words. So more than anything else, this is what typifies original tantric yoga. Mantra, mudra, visualization in concert, entrained together in a single flow. And I just gave the example of that one practice. And then, of course, you come back down to earth. Essence emanates space, space emanates wind, wind emanates fire, fire emanates water, water emanates earth. Most tantrikas in the original tradition would do this practice every day. And in this way would get in touch with the fundamental qualities of existence and allow them to recalibrate within their system. And so I just give that as an example of a practice that doesn't necessarily make much sense from outside the tradition, but does from within as part of a kind of network of interrelated practices. One other practice I'll mention is uchara. This is another practice that most tantrikas did every single day. And uchara is, okay, so you know there's a central channel, Sushumna Nadi, or Madhya Nadi, a central channel running from the pelvic floor to the crown of the head, a kind of column of light or a column of energy running through the center of the body. And this can be visualized as a column of golden light or white gold light, or a column of cobalt blue light, depending on your lineage. So at any rate, uchara is chanting a bija mantra or a seed syllable like Om, but imagining that sound vibration is also a light vibration. It's a point of light rising through the central channel as you chant Om or one of the other bija mantras like Hreem or Shreem or Haum. So I just give this an example so you know what the practices of the original tradition were like. Of course, there's so many more, but this is just a very prototypical practice. So in uchara, then it's impossible to really demonstrate because there's a lot of stuff happening internally. But essentially, I breathe in all the way down to the pelvic floor, gentle mula bandha, and I initiate the resonance of Om, and I let it rise from the pelvic floor up and out the crown of the head, pausing at the level of the palate to vibrate in the nasal cavity in order to break a psychic blockage that exists there. So it's kind of like this. And then again and again and again and again. Doing that Om on every exhale for, a few dozen rounds or a few hundred rounds. It can be a powerful practice. It can create a lot of energy. It's not recommended for those who get ungrounded easily. So that's called uchara. And again, there's more to it, but that's a little bit. And it's a synesthetic, remember. As you are chanting, you're imagining a light rising through the central channel, and the light is the sound. And it pauses here for a little bit, and then rises up and out the crown of the head. So in each round of uchara, then, you're recapitulating the whole life cycle, because when you finish the exhale and pause the breath without taking the inhale, it's a little death, as it were. It's a complete surrender. It's an offering of yourself into the whole universe. And there's a kind of gentle uddiyana bandha that happens there at the end too. It's a moment of complete stillness, a moment of complete silence. And if you don't take another breath, that's it, you're dead, right? So it is the little death, as it were. And then you do take another breath, but as a choice. You're choosing this life, you're choosing this embodiment, you're choosing to be here consciously. And so coming into embodiment, So in that way, recapitulating the life cycle and the two aspects of the spiritual path, which are simply, in their essence, the spiritual path is all about surrender to the universe, as it were, and again and again choosing to engage intimately with the real circumstances of this life and all that it has to offer you. So we're just taking this little walk together in tantric practice, and let me give you one simple practice that can facilitate further awakening. That's so simple you can do it anytime, anywhere, anyhow. And it is really simple. And as you progress with it, it becomes very profound. Sometimes the simplest practices take you very, very, very deep. And this is one of those. So as you're walking around, as you're in the grocery store, as you're talking to someone, anywhere, anytime, you can just drop your awareness into your heart center, and not just anywhere in your heart, but down into the very kind of what I call the root of the heart, or the base of the heart region. So if this whole area is your heart region, then it's like letting your awareness drop down to that place, which isn't exactly a place, where it comes to rest. So if the heart region is like a kind of sphere of energy in your chest, it's like bringing the center point of your awareness into the base, or even the back of the base of the heart. So it's dropping in and down and back a little bit until like the center point of your awareness, the center point of your selfhood, as it were, feels like it's in here, in the base and even the back of the base of the heart center. And so I guess it's hard to describe in words now that I'm trying to describe it. But it is a very real sensation. It's very palpable once you get the hang of it. And anyone could ask you at any moment, are you in your heart or not? And you would know, you have an answer. You're like, oh, no, I'm all up in here. Or, yeah, I am, but not completely. I'm up here on the top of the heart, and I just need to relax and just drop in a little bit more, So where you are experiencing yourself from and where you're experiencing the world from, that's what I'm calling, the center point of your awareness. And in the Tantric tradition, it is metaphorically likened to a bee. And so, it's like where you're putting your attention keeps wandering here and there. Oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that so much. Oh, that seems interesting. Oh, well, I have a pain in my leg. And it's just wandering, this bee that wanders all over the place, right? And so that the metaphor in the Tantric tradition, and this is, again, a governing metaphor you find in virtually all lineages, it's just all over the place. It's a pretty much universal in the tradition, is that the heart center is like a lotus flower that for most people is closed or partially closed. And so part of the work is to invite the opening of that heart center. That lotus flower starts to open up. And the more it opens, the more attractive it becomes to the wandering bee, right? The wandering bee of your attention gets drawn into the heart center, because that's where the sweetness is, that's where the nectar is. So there's various, practices and energy body work and healing, opening therapy. Anything that works to open the heart center is good. And opening the heart center what it means is that you're feeling everything fully, and that can be painful or scary as long as you're believing the stories that get attached to or tagged onto those feelings or emotions. So that's why we have the Vikalpakshaya practice I told you about, dissolving story. Because if you don't dissolve story, then letting yourself feel everything that arises in you in response to life is overwhelming, but it's not intrinsically overwhelming. It's overwhelming because of the stories that get tagged on, and that those stories can magnify pain and suffering, or they can get us stuck in a particular feeling or emotion, where otherwise we wouldn't be stuck. You can't be stuck in an energy without a story to stick you there, an interpretation, So, for example, just take a simple example that everyone's experienced. Let's say you're in a relationship that's very loving and close and intimate, and then that other person leaves or goes away, disappears, or dies. Now, that's going to be painful. That's naturally painful. That's just grief arises then, and there's no way out of it. You need to just let it move through you. And it does move through you. And what happens, though, is most people, they not only have the grief, they have a story that's tagged onto it that gets them stuck in it, doesn't allow it to move through. For example, the story, "I'll never be loved like that again," or "Now I'm alone," or "He or she was the only one who really got me." Right? So if you believe those thoughts, what happens is the thoughts serve as kind of Velcro. They don't allow the energy to fully pass through. Right? So you get stuck in the grief, in the sorrow. And indeed, you can grieve someone for the rest of your life if you want to. You can spend 40 years just hanging out in that grief. Or you can let it move through, because that's what it wants to do. All energy wants to move. So when you are able to see the story clearly and say, actually, that's just a thought that I can choose to believe or not. When I believe it, it magnifies my pain and suffering. When I don't, that energy is able to move through me. So I'm just giving a relatively simple example of a very crucial principle. So what you find is that energy does want to move, that emotions are very transient, and a particular emotion usually only lasts a few minutes, and then it's gone. Some a few seconds, But if you cling to a story that might make that emotion recur and recur and recur, or just sort of get stuck until there's a release of that story and a willingness to experience the energy. Okay, so all of this was just a commentary on what it means to have an open heart. To have an open heart is to let yourself feel everything while not getting stuck in those feelings by laying aside and ultimately even dissolving your interpretations of why you're feeling what you're feeling, your story about it, So feeling everything fully as pure energetic reality, to the point that you're not even labeling the emotions, because in fact, we're not even very good at that, as some sociological and psychological research has shown. We're not good at labeling our emotions. People, these labels are very haphazard, and it's ultimately not helpful to say, oh, this is anger, oh, this is fear, because then it's a reductionism that doesn't allow you to kind of experience the nuance and textures and flavors of that particular feeling. So when you slap a label on it, it's a form of just pushing the energy away, trying to get control over it by understanding it, through understanding what it is. Now I can deal with it. But emotions are not meant to be dealt with. They're meant to be allowed to pass fully through you. And so, again, releasing even the label, even the name, and letting everything move through you and experiencing it fully in its nuance and flavor and texture and character, without making a self out of it either, without forming a self-image on the basis of this experience, no matter how many times it happens. Easier said than done, yes, but that's the work, and it's deeply rewarding work. So that's what it means to have an open heart, one that feels fully, one that is open to all beings, all things, all creatures, just open, just, and that openness that can be a vulnerability associated, a sensitivity. That's all very much worth it. Okay, to be open is to be alive. To be closed down is to be half dead. And we're never satisfied by anything less than aliveness, even if aliveness hurts sometimes. But with that story release whole practice, what you find is that an open heart experiences more joy than it does sorrow by quite a considerable margin. That's just its nature. Okay, so the lotus opens, and then the bee of attention is drawn there, and it nestles into that nectar, and that's the tantric metaphor, And so, just the simple practice that I was introducing, which can just do so much for you if you make it into a almost constant thing or a very regular thing, is that wherever you are, you're kind of thinking about something. Oh, I need to do this. Oh, I need to. Oh, this person is talking to me. Oh, whatever. You can do everything you need to do in life, but just drop your center point of awareness, your center point of selfhood, into the base of the heart. We tend to kind of hang out up here in our frontal lobes or behind our eyes, and that's where our kind of sense of self is localized. Relax the jaw. By the way, this really helps a lot. Completely relax the jaw, and that allows you to drop down that center point of awareness into the base of the heart, and then see what happens. See how you move through the world differently when you're just aware of the base of your heart. Then you can, if you would like to add a visualization, you can visualize a tiny point of sparkling light in the base of the heart. And it's sending out rays in all directions. And those rays are meeting other people's rays, because other people have a tiny point of light in the base of their heart. If you're just walking down the street or in the supermarket or whatever, then this is a good visualization to visualize each person has a tiny point of sparkling light, just like you do, and all the rays are going out and they're dancing together in a certain way. And it might sound silly to some of you, but boy, is it a sweet practice, and it is a reminder of the truth, because everyone, even the mean person, even the twisted person, they have that point of light. They might not have access to their innermost essence, their divine nature, but that's still there, and you can visualize it, and it might change how you interact with all beings. So you can add kind of some more layers to the practice, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing, say, an algebra problem, it's difficult to imagine the points of light and everyone around you at the same time as you're doing that. But with practice, even that's possible. But just the simple sense of being aware of the heart center, that you can do while doing anything else. Again, sounds like not much, but it's a practice that keeps revealing more depth to itself. Let me see how much time we have. Okay, so if you're watching the video on the record, now might be a good time to just take a little pause, a little refresher, a little stretch. So go ahead and pause now. Welcome back. As you might guess, the majority of tantric practice is not appropriate to reveal in this medium, in this format. So, the deeper practices are supposed to be learned person to person, in person, on retreat, or in a practice environment. Satsang is a simple gathering for a single evening of community of spiritual seekers or practitioners. And these are the contexts in which the practice is unfolded. and a certain amount can happen in this anonymous medium of the internet, and a certain amount of transmission can and does occur. But if you really want to learn this tradition, you need to sit with teachers. I mentioned some teachers of Shaiva Tantra in particular in the back of my book. I also mentioned some teachers of Buddhist Tantra there, for that matter. So now we're going to look at why does the practice not work? Because the thing is, the tradition basically says, hey, if you do this, it works. Awakening, liberation, those cease to be abstract terms to you. They become your palpably felt, lived reality. And if it's not working, there's some specific reason that it's not working, right? So in terms of those 3 stages of awakening, you know, this first stage, Anava Samavesha, you should expect this to be the fruit of anywhere from about 8 months to 3 years of focused, dedicated practice, where practice means, you know, the cultivation of view, meaning immersing yourself in the teachings, as well as doing all the practices that are available to you. And practicing with the right attitude or motive is important. We'll come to that in a minute. But if, you know, so if you're doing that, in this relatively short time span of half a year to 3 years, you should experience some major results, some major fruit, and that's Anava Samavesha, awakening to your essence nature. And the results of that, as I said, show up really substantially in your life, and people will notice the difference, and you will become just naturally more open, more compassionate, more loving, easier to get along with, free of reactivity, comfortable in your own skin, not judging, blaming, or condemning yourself. And as you can imagine, being free of all that is quite a relief indeed. Can you imagine being totally free of all self-criticism, condemnation? Because I forgot to mention in the last class, total self-acceptance is one of the primary signs of this Anava Samavesha. Total self-acceptance of just all that manifests in the field that gets called you. So that total self-acceptance is a big part of what makes possible these subsequent stages. Okay, so if this is not showing up for you, and you're like, wait a second, I've been practicing for 15 years. That's a lot more than 3, and this hasn't all shown up for me. Tradition says, okay, there's a specific reason for that. Now I've organized these reasons into this list. The tradition doesn't give this list all in one place. You know, this is part of what a teacher does, by the way, is like organize material and present it in a more digestible form to you. So, you know, but these teachings are very much there. And by the way, I should mention that, you know, I've of course had transmission from living teachers, and everything I'm teaching in these classes, when I talk about tradition, the tradition, I'm always meaning both oral and textual transmission. That is to say, it is a tradition where we combine the teachings from our living teachers with the contemplations of the age-old wisdom in the scriptures. So I'm always drawing on both sources. So some of this material is from oral transmission. You don't find it in any particular text, but the general sentiment is certainly there. Even for that material that comes from oral transmission is reflected in the texts in various ways. So I say, why do yogis today fail to achieve these stages of awakening? 7 reasons. Again, this is my own list, but drawing on what has been transmitted to me in multiple streams. Okay, first reason. Lack of alignment of view, practice, and fruit. So let's look at these three Sanskrit terms: darshana, sadhana, or just sadhana in Hindi, sadhana in Sanskrit. So most people have heard the pronunciation sadhana, which is from Hindi. Phala, fruit or result of the practice. These three must be in alignment. What does it mean for them to be in alignment? Well, when we talk about fruit, we mean what fruit you're going for. We're talking about clarifying your aspiration. We're talking about knowing what you want. So in terms of aligning, is there an alignment between your view, your practice, and the goal that you're seeking? So you back engineer this by, you start from the fruit. What is it that you want? This is how the whole path takes shape. First, you have to really clarify your aspiration. You have to know what it is you want. Okay, and you might say, oh yeah, okay, I want awakening, this awakening thing, but awakening is not real to you until it is. So you have to make it personal. So it has to be something that really resonates with you. Like if you say, I really want to know the truth that lies beyond my mind, the truth of being that can only be known directly, if that fires you up, great. Or maybe it's, I want to have total access to the source of unconditional love within me. Or maybe it's, I want to experience radical freedom and openness in any situation and circumstance. All of these are just aspects of one and the same fruit, the goal of the path, but you have to kind of pick which aspect of that fruit excites you and fires you up. You must have a clear sense of your aspiration, or the whole practice can't really work, because desire is the engine of the practice. In all tantric sadhana, we're placing desire in service of liberation. So you need to know what you want, and then you can line up your practice and your view with that. Okay, so I gave some examples. This is also called sankalpa, your intention. What are you aiming at? What fruit are you aiming at? Okay. Now, having said that, the next question is, are you doing the practice that will lead to that fruit? So let's say you want this awakening to your true nature and liberation from identification with the conditioned mind. Now, if you tell me you want that, and your practice just consists of, say, doing the physical postures and some pranayamas, then I'll say, well, look, that sadhana, that practice is all very good, but it's not going to lead in and of itself to the result that you want. If you say, I want a fitter physical body, I want to feel better in my body, and I want to have a clearer mind, well, actually, then in that case, doing the physical postures and pranayama, that can lead to that result. It depends how clear of a mind you want, but pranayama can help clarify the mind. So in that case, the teacher says, sure, great, you're set up. You're doing the practice that leads to that fruit. But this is where you have to have a teacher, because that's the whole point, is that the clarity of what practice leads to what fruit is not totally apparent for the beginner or even the intermediate student. So you ask your teacher, am I doing the practice that leads to this fruit? Thirdly, remember, we're back engineering it. This is how you get properly set up. Darshana, you need to have a view that supports your practice, that empowers your practice instead of undermines it. So as we'll talk about in a minute, if you have the view, there's something wrong with me as I am, and I'm doing yoga in order to fix it, then that view will actually undermine the practice and eventually disable it if you don't change the view. Whereas if you have the view, there's something right with me as I am, and I'm doing yoga in order to discover it, then that view supports and empowers the practice. Okay, so I'm just giving really simple examples. The point is, again, what do you want? That's the third bullet point. Are you doing the practice that leads to what you want? And are you holding the view or vision of reality that supports that practice? This is called alignment of view, practice, and fruit. Without it, the fruit doesn't actualize, the practice doesn't work, or it works somewhat, but not all the way. So if you're serious about the spiritual path in your life, then contemplating this alignment or lack thereof is pretty important, and consulting with your teachers, if you have several, about this is a good idea. So in my book, Tantra Illuminated, I spend 100 pages outlining the basic darshana, the vision of reality, which in the Tantric tradition was thought to be most accurate, most aligned, and most empowering to the practice, which will actually lead you to the fruit of the direct experience of reality. Okay, so read more about that in the book if you like. Okay, moving on. Energy leaks. Boy, this is huge in the American lifestyle. Well, kind of in the global lifestyle actually now, because the American lifestyle has exported itself so successfully. Okay, so energy leaks. Now, maybe I put these in the wrong order, but basically, spiritual practice generates energy, as I've already said. Now, if you're generating energy through your spiritual practice, energy that you're going to need to bust through some of your, stories, self-images, and mental constructs. The thing is, you need to generate, and you need to have that energy instead of just leaking it all out again. So your body mind is like a container. It's like a vessel, and if you have holes in that vessel, then you will just leak out all the energy that you have generated. In the yogic tradition, there's the notion of, there's this metaphor whereby it was believed that the milk of a lioness is so powerful that it'll eat through any container except one of pure gold. Of course, this is completely mythical, but it doesn't matter. It's a useful metaphor. So you have to make a container of pure gold so the milk of the lioness won't just eat right through it and seep away. So the container of pure gold here means having little to no energy leaks, so that the energy you build doesn't just leak out again. We see this constantly. You go to some beautiful teacher or guru or workshop or something, you get a big hit of energy and you feel so good, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really going to do this, and I'm going to meditate every day, and I'm going to do everything I need to do, and I'm going to conquer the world. And then 5 days later, you're back to exactly where you were before that workshop, before you got hugged by that guru or whatever. So why? Energy leaks. That's the answer. Here's a few. You'll see that these, you might get a little overwhelmed by the notion of plugging these leaks, but little by little, step by step, one at a time, work on plugging these leaks. The primary one, of course, we see in the modern lifestyle is exhaustion from overdoing. So just doing too much, just running around too much, just trying to accomplish so much, and just overdoing. And even when we're not working, we're still doing. We have these busy lifestyles, and we pack them in, and we overschedule ourselves. And that's a huge energy leak. The exhaustion, and even before the exhaustion sets in, you are already leaking energy. You see, that's why the exhaustion sets in. But when you're exhausted, it's already too late. You've leaked it, So this is so important for a spiritual practitioner, because you don't want to lose all that energy you generated, or what's the point of the practice? So do less, simplify your life. How do you do that? Well, it's your life. You've got to find a way. You've got to be serious about wanting to do it, Strongly held beliefs, this is bullet point number 2. Strongly held beliefs and opinions are an energy leak. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? because, you know, it's a calcification in the system of the energy body, but calcifications cause the energy to sort of get stuck, and then it sort of, you know, pops out and leaks away in the same way that if you take a tube of toothpaste and screw the cap on really tight and then squeeze it as hard as you can, the toothpaste is going to come out somewhere, you know. So in the same way, energy that's stuck, you know, tends to just then, you know, dissipate. And here we're talking about the energy that we want, right? The energy generated from spiritual practice. It wants to move through your system and sort of bless every part of you, we could say. Gets stuck, it can't do anything there, and then it dissipates. So the stuckness often comes from strongly held beliefs and opinions, which are like a rigidification of some part of our energy body, we could say. And notice how strongly held beliefs aren't really good for anyone. You know, it makes you argue with people more. It makes people argue with you more. And if you held the belief strongly enough, you know, then what happens is, well, just look at the world. People kill each other over beliefs, you know, all the time, actually. So, you know, the obviously in reality, there's no such thing as a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, right? These are mental constructs. And they identify communities of people with similar mental constructs, right? But they're still just mental constructs. We're just humans, you know, we're all just humans. So when people kill each other for being something different, they're killing each other over a belief, right? Now I give this dramatic example, but I just want to note that strongly held beliefs are violent, even if they don't lead to actual bloodshed. We cultivate on the tantric path softness of heart and openness and willingness to listen, willingness to hold space for the other person, willingness to be wrong. Keep asking yourself, would you rather be happy or right? Bullet point number 3, ill health is an energy leak, right? So taking the time to cultivate health, that's really important. In all the ways that you can cultivate health, you know, not getting health obsessed or anything, but just taking the time to take care of yourself, just to care for yourself, that plugs the energy leak. Samskaric or habitual behavior patterns. Habitual behavior patterns that you do without reflecting on whether they're beneficial in that particular moment. Maybe you get home from work every day and you open a beer and you sit down in front of the TV for half an hour and you say, oh, but this is so good for me, I'm relaxing. You know, the thing is, any habitual behavior pattern that you do without reflecting on whether it's beneficial for that moment of that day with the condition that your body is in at that time is an energy leak. Okay, so self-reflection is crucial on this path. Sober connection to your real situation and self-reflection on that situation is the ground of spiritual work, the ground of spiritual progress. Unconscious speech. So that's gossip is unconscious speech, of course, but also just, you know, you're talking with someone, you're having a nice conversation and it's fruitful and it feels nourishing. And then at some point it just kind of veers off into gossip. It ceases to be nourishing and it starts being an energy leak. So pay attention to that and you'll notice, you can actually feel the difference. You can feel when the conversation is no longer nourishing, it's just coasting. And then it goes from coasting into actually depleting you. Okay, too much speech is depleting, especially unconscious speech, but really too much talking of any kind is going to be a depleting eventually. One of my teachers said, the power of your words increases in direct proportion to the silence that you keep. Of course, I'm talking a lot in these courses, but okay, escapist thought. That's a huge energy leak for most people, which is fantasies or anxieties regarding the future. and reveries or regrets regarding the past, entering into these thought worlds, inhabiting these thought worlds of fantasy, anxiety, reverie, and regret. This is escapist thought. It's a big, big energy leak, one of the biggest. You don't even realize how much it's an energy leak until you stop doing it. And you'll find I have a lot more energy. I feel more alive. I feel more in my body. I feel more happy. I feel more connected to people. Unbelievable results, you know. Again, none of these things are easy to implement as changes in your life. Nothing really worth doing is that easy, is it? So escapist thoughts, and for that matter, all other forms of buffering. So buffering is when you push away an uncomfortable feeling with whatever activity. So you can push away an uncomfortable feeling like sadness or boredom through fantasizing, or through eating ice cream, or through watching TV, or through surfing the internet, or through looking at your Facebook feed, or through gossiping. All of these are buffering. Well, they're not always buffering. All of these can be forms of buffering. The question is to ask yourself, this is not about those activities in general. Do you see what I mean? It's not bad to eat ice cream or whatever. It's asking yourself, am I doing this in order to push away a feeling of sadness or boredom or something like that? If you are, that's buffering, and that will be an energy leak. Using sexual energy in depleting as opposed to rejuvenating ways. Yeah, just pay attention. You know, everything comes from paying attention. Just notice when it's depleting as opposed to rejuvenating. Flirtation, you know, sex play, sex with strangers, whatever you're into, that's all fine. Just ask yourself, to what extent is this depleting, and to what extent is it rejuvenating for me? And if it's rejuvenating, from the tantric point of view anyway, go for it. It's great. And anything that's rejuvenating done in excess will be depleting. Relationships without clarity. Relationships without clarity is fine if you don't want or need clarity. For example, when we're just getting to know someone, we don't yet want or need clarity about how we're going to relate to them, how they're going to relate to us. You know, is this a friend? Is this a lover? Is this a partner? Is this a acquaintance? Is this a business contact? You know, you explore with someone and you don't need to know the answer right away. But eventually, lack of clarity in the relationship when you want and need clarity is an energy leak. If you really don't want or need clarity at all, honestly, it's not an energy leak. But if you do, like most people, it is to continue in that relationship without that clarity. Okay, obviously I could do a whole workshop just on that one bullet point, but I'm moving on. Number 3, lack of access to the full palette of yogic practices that serve to generate liberative energy. So in other words, most people just in the modern yoga world just don't have access to the full range of practices that the original tradition came up with to support you in this whole process. And so what most people have access to is an extremely attenuated range of practices. And so, you know, in my immersion course, which is a 5-month long kind of deep immersion into tantric practice and philosophy, the students probably get, I don't know, several dozen distinct, really powerful practices that are not in general circulation in the yoga world, or a few of them are, you know. So getting the access to the full palette is really important, because a practice that works for some people doesn't work for others, and the right one for you, or the right ones, the right handful of practices that are really going to work for you, you know, you don't know what they are until you try them. So full palette of practice generates more of this Shakti, this liberative energy, that you will in turn leak less of if you've already addressed the energy leaks. Okay. Yeah. Hey, for some of you are excited right now with all this information, and some of you might be overwhelmed. Look, this is a comprehensive, well, as comprehensive as it can be in 4 hours. Obviously, it's not really comprehensive, but it's, you know, it's a somewhat detailed download of everything. Well, not everything, of a lot of things I think you need to know in order to actually do this and do it successfully. You know, I'm interested in working with people who take liberation and awakening seriously as real possibilities in your life, you know, in the scope of the next few years, because it is a real possibility. And in my view, the world of modern yoga does people a great disservice by not communicating to them that it is a real possibility. Now, that's perfectly understandable because most of the people teaching yoga are not experiencing this. We're not experiencing liberation and awakening in this full sense. So, of course, they're not going to kind of put it out there as a viable possibility. So, you know, it'd be nice if, as the people get more full access to the richness of the original tradition, there is gonna be more kind of awakening going on, and we can kind of let people know that this is a real possibility, that if they want to do yoga just to have a nice butt, that is absolutely fine. There's no problem or judgment around that. Like, go to the studio that's going to give you the practice that's going to give you the abs and the butt. And if they want spiritual awakening through their yoga, they should have access to that. I would like them to have access to that as well, to have access to the full range, from nice abs to total liberation. That, you know, all of those goals are valid, and the tools are there, and let's just educate, you know, these communities so that they're available to people, and that they're encouraged to pursue what their heart really longs for. Okay, that was my momentary aside diatribe. Let's return to the reasons, you know, and these 7 are pretty comprehensive, I would say. If you address these 7 things, you're going to be soaring in your spiritual practice. You're going to be just like rocket fuel, you know. It'll feel like there's such a huge difference. You can't imagine if you address even 5 out of these 7 things, your practice just takes off. Okay. Number 4, impure motive versus pure motive. Now, don't get hung up on the words impure and pure. That just means ineffective and effective motives. The impure motive is just an ineffective motive. It's one that won't work. It's not impure in the sense of sinful or bad or wrong. It's impure in the sense of it is flawed. It will not work. Okay? It will not lead to liberation / awakening. So there are 3 aspects to the impure motive. The first is, as it says there, doing your practice with a vision of yourself as broken, wrong, or bad, and seeing your practice as a means to fix the broken self. So most people start with this impure motive, and that's fine, of course. Everyone starts with impure motive. Nobody starts with pure motive except some, you know, very rare, you know, Buddha baby or something. But everyone starts with impure motive, so that's fine. It's just a matter of identifying why it doesn't work and then letting it go and acquiring pure motive. So, as I said before, if you think there's something wrong with you as you are, and you're doing yoga or any spiritual practice to fix that problem, then you are doing it on the basis of a story or a view that isn't true, and therefore the practice can't activate its full power, because the reason for which you're doing it is out of alignment with reality. So, because there isn't anything wrong with you, you see. There never was anything wrong with you except your belief that there's something wrong with you. Now, I'm talking about, you have to look into the subtle, into your, subconscious a little bit here, because you might not realize that you're holding this view of yourself. You might not realize until you really take a good, clear look at it. Am I doing yoga to fix the broken self? Am I hoping that I'll become a better person and then people will love me and then I'll love myself because I'll be lovable, whereas before I wasn't? That motive is not going to work. It's going to generate some energy. It's going to do a little something for you, but it's not going to actualize the full fruit of the practice, not even close. So this is participating in the religious discourse, because religions tell you, 1, there's something wrong with you. 2, we have the answer. That's what all religions say, right? But we're interested in spiritual practice, not religion in this particular paradigm. Okay, spiritual practice can happen within religion, by the way, within the context of religion, or not. It doesn't matter, wherever you want to be doing it. You want to belong to a church or an ashram, fine, or not. But you can be doing spiritual practice within the context of religion, but it's not necessarily the case that you are. So if you're buying into that whole dialogue of there's something wrong with you, here's the way to fix it, even just subconsciously, it's not gonna be effective. So the antidote to that is the cultivation of the view. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something right with me as I am. My essence nature is already perfectly divine. I'm just doing this practice in order to reveal that more fully, in order to experience it more fully. Okay, impure motive number 2 is doing the practice to get high, to attain blissful states, to attain higher states of consciousness, to get off, basically, in increasingly subtle ways that, it's such a subtle form of getting off that you can look down on other people who are addicted to sense pleasures. But in fact, you are similarly addicted. You just have a more refined object of addiction, which doesn't make it better. So is your spiritual practice in pursuit of, some higher state of consciousness, which will make you special or superior to, or stand above in some way, ordinary human folk? Do you want to essentially become a god or a titan with your practice? Now, I'm giving the very kind of heavy-handed articulation to it. In you, it might be much, much more subtle. It might be a subtle grasping after, oh gosh, that felt so good, that meditation I had, I'm going to meditate again and hope to feel good like that again. As soon as you're grasping after experience, you're not open to what is. If you're not open to what is, you're already off track. You're not doing the real practice. So spiritual materialism, the second bullet point, it's what it's about, is collecting peak experiences, as it were. That's not going to work to actualize the fruit, because awakening is about awakening to love for reality as it is, not as you want it to be, right? It's about letting go of your attempt to manipulate your experience and letting yourself fall in love with the natural flow of life and what life wants to do through you, right? And, there's nothing wrong with having what you enjoy. That's not what we're talking about, right? That instead, if your spiritual practice is aimed at pleasure rather than truth, feeling good rather than knowing the truth, it will not take you all the way. So most people who are doing yoga who are not in impure motive number 1 are in impure motive number 2. California yoga, it's all about feeling good. I do yoga to feel good. What's wrong with that? Absolutely nothing, unless you want liberation, awakening. If you want the goal that's posited by the original tradition, then you have to sacrifice your desire for feeling good on the altar of truth. So that means that you learn to want the truth more than you want to feel good. Now, ironically, knowing the truth of your own being will lead to more bliss than you've ever felt, but that can't be the reason you're doing it, or you're constantly kind of pushing it away. It's like the carrot on the stick in front of the donkey is chasing it forever. Very simply, you have to want to know the truth more than you want to feel good. And you might not be able to access that yet. You might say, I can't want the truth more than I want to feel good. Fine, just keep practicing, and sooner or later, you will want the truth more than anything else, because you'll realize that feeling good is a temporary state, and it's ultimately unsatisfying compared to knowing the truth of your own being. Experiencing the truth of your own being is what I mean by knowing. Okay. So everyone has impure motive until they get to pure motive. That's just the way it goes. So it's fine to have impure motive, right? I have to reassure people over and over again, this tradition has no judgment of you where you are. It's just offering an invitation of telling you what's necessary if you want the big enchilada, as it were. Or the whole enchilada, the big kahuna, I don't know. Third impure motive, to acquire power over others, doing your practice to become magnificent in such a way that other people will recognize and acknowledge your magnificence. Yeah, I won't waste any breath on that one, but it is. I mean, we do see it. Unfortunately, we see it most among big yoga teachers. Anyway, not all. I'm not pointing any fingers or anything. Plenty of yoga teachers with total integrity around. Not as many as we would like, but plenty. Okay. So then what's pure motive? Pure motive is the antidote to all three of the impure motives. It is walking the path out of love for yourself as an expression of your true nature for the benefit of all beings. So those three phrases antidote the three pure motives. Do you see that? Walking the path out of love for yourself, not hatred for yourself. It's not there's something wrong with you. It's that you love yourself enough to want to unfold all that is within you, to want to access and express your essence nature as an act of love. That's pure motive. Doing this practice, walking this path out of love for yourself as an expression of your true nature, as opposed to grasping after pleasure, higher states of consciousness, etc. Just because it's your nature to do so. That's why you walk the path. And instead of power over others, of charismatic or any other kind of power, it's to benefit all beings. Now, most people, upon hearing this teaching, do not already have pure motive. So what do? You, to put it bluntly, pray. May I have the pure motive. Every single time you practice, every single time you come to your cushion, every single time you come to your mat, every time you practice with someone or alone, may I have the pure motive. May I walk the path out of love for myself as an expression of my true nature for the benefit of all beings. And, of course, recast that into language that makes sense for you. If this language isn't fully resonant, tweak it. Like, what's your expression of the pure motive? You have to pray for it usually before it starts to show up. When pure motive shows up, your practice takes off like you can't believe. Really big difference to the effectiveness of meditation, of mantra, of all the practices. So I'm, kind of running out of time, and these points cannot be covered in depth in this short course. That's why I do an immersion program for people who are interested in that. The next one starts in March. So it's great to do the immersion in such a way that you're really devoting yourself to the process, and you're not doing a bunch of other things at the same time. So starting in March means you have time to kind of organize your life to really give yourself to the spiritual process for a few months. A few months that's nothing compared to your whole life. Can you imagine doing something for a few months that resonates for decades to come, that changes the course of your life? That's not that great of a sacrifice, is it? So the reason I mentioned the immersion is because that's where we explore this practice that helps to alleviate or even dissolve heavy family karma. Number 5, sometimes you're in a family where some pretty heavy shit has been passed down from generation to generation, some pretty heavy trauma and pain and abuse. And that can be a kind of obstacle on your path. It can be a big burden. And so there's specific practices that the tradition developed to clear that and to release that and to move that, so that what your ancestors did and your parents and grandparents for the last 10 generations doesn't have to prevent you from waking up to your essence nature for their benefit, for the benefit of all beings, as well as you, beginning with you. Number 6, and this is also addressed, in my immersion program and in many other teachers' programs as well. Lack of support from community is a big reason the practice doesn't work. If you're just kind of trying to do this on your own out there, right? People have done it and they do it. There are those who completely wake up out of their conditioning and become free on their own, but it's relatively rare, to have the support of community in some way or another is really helpful. Kula in the Shaiva Tantric tradition, it's called Kula. In the Buddhist, it's of course called Sangha, spiritual community. Number 7, and this is the subject of a whole long workshop. Your spiritual practice can get hijacked by a realm fixation. So this terminology comes from Tantric psychology. Tantric psychology is expressed in a teaching called the 6 realms. And the 6 realms are 6 states of mind which lead us away from our essence nature and into delusion. So if your practice can, and sort of inevitably will, get hijacked by a realm fixation, and if it's a minor hijack, you can sort of correct it with a little feedback from teachers and friends, even if you don't know the realm teachings. But the realm teachings are helpful to identify these fixations which lead us astray, and if uncorrected, can sometimes, in some people, lead into a state of delusion so deep that the person does not escape from it in this lifetime, which is sad, but it's not the end of the world. Everyone has a chance to see through their delusion upon exiting the physical body. It's a golden opportunity, in fact. And if you can see through your delusion in that moment, then you won't continue in it in your next situation. So what are these 6 realms? Well, that's what I don't have time to get into, but here's a diagram that I came up with. And obviously these illustrations cannot at all capture these complex kind of states of mind or subtle modes of being, these attitudes that lead us astray. But just briefly, I'll just show you what we're talking about here, so you're just alerted to this teaching somewhat. So in the center, we have real human presence, RHP. This is not a traditional acronym or something. I'm just putting it here. Real human presence means just being in your true nature, your simple, beautiful, divine human nature, being in your center. It's what I've been talking about for along the last 2 hours, is about accessing your natural state, which is called presence, or here, real human presence, to distinguish it from the 6 realms, which are named after 6 different kinds of beings in Indian mythology. So the demon realm here, also known as the hell realm, the hungry ghost realm. I'm moving my mouse pointer, maybe you can see that. Hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, the Titan realm, the God realm, and the human mind realm. So that's why we call this in the middle real human presence, distinguishing it from these other non-human type of beings, as well as from getting lost in the mind. Now, these are metaphorical realms. Well, some people believe they're actual realms too, but you don't need to believe that for this teaching. They're metaphorical realms. They're states of mind that any of us can get caught in, and to kind of give one sentence to each, which is far from adequate to really get this teaching. But demon realm or hell realm is primarily centered on victim mentality, a belief that you've been wronged or victimized or persecuted in some way, that people are against you, and you know, the world is a scary place and you're a tiny little victim of it. That kind of view on reality, that's called the demon realm. Hungry ghost realm is grasping, endless grasping. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, craving for the one experience or teacher or person or lover who's finally going to make you happy and liberate you, always looking for happiness outside of yourself in some way or another. That's hungry ghost realm. And getting the briefest possible explanations, you need kind of hours of discussion to really grasp the subtleties of these realms. Animal realm is prioritizing comfort over, well, growth, I suppose, over intimacy. Addiction to comfort is animal realm. And addiction to all the buffering techniques, fear of intimacy, and fear of vulnerability and growth. Then Titan realm is Asura Loka in Sanskrit, is competition, aggression, trying to prove yourself by accomplishment, believing you need to prove yourself through accomplishment, believing accomplishment even matters. The second place is the first loser. That's Titan realm in a nutshell, in a slogan. God realm, which is belief that you are somehow special or specialer than others, that you stand head and shoulders above the common herd, the common mass of humanity, as it were, that you have a special connection to the divine, that you have some special access, that you're a channel in a special way that other people couldn't be, whether you say this out loud or not, and whether you even think it clearly or not, it's kind of there in the background. God realm, the belief that you are somehow special, have a special connection to the divine, when of course, in actuality, all beings equally express divine essence, and there's no such thing as specialer. We're all special, nobody's specialer. And God realm is also addiction to refined pleasures attained through spiritual practice. And human mind realm, that is seeking knowledge as a buffer against the fear of the unknown, being addicted to understanding and categorizing, whether you're into psychoanalysis, whether you're into the Enneagram, whether you're into any kind of personality typing, whether you're into astrology, whether you're even into the six realms teachings to an excessive degree. Those are all examples and many more of human mind realm, how we try to get control over life through trying to understand it. And we seek security in knowledge and in data, as it were. And it's a false sense of security, of course, because our happiness lies in the direction of trusting the unknown, not in controlling it through concepts. There's a lot more to say about that particular realm, because it's one that all humans fall victim to. But anyway, so that's just a very brief outline of the six realms teachings. It's good to explore it in greater depth because, as I said, any of these can pull us away from real human presence and actually hijack our spiritual process. And our spiritual practices can end up reinforcing the energy of one of these realms if that's where we're primarily hanging out. So if you're really fascinated by this little taste of Six Realms teachings, by far the best book, the only good book, in my opinion, on this teaching is Opening the Heart of Compassion by Martin Lowenthal and Lair Short. And, you know, the book can't give you the full transmission, but it's a pretty damn good book. Okay, so now look what we've done. We've done quite a wonderful thing in a relatively short space of time. We've mapped out the basic kind of historical context of the tradition, and there's a lot more about that in Tantra Illuminated. We've looked at the purpose of the practice. We've looked at the goal triangle. We understand now why people do this practice, or traditionally why they did it and why they can still do it if they want. And we looked at the stages of awakening according to one lineage. That's not a universal tantric teaching. It's just according to the Trika lineage. Those stages are found in the Malini Vijayottara Tantra. And I think it's just a great map. I love to share that, even though it's not a universal tantric teaching. You know, sometimes we share things just from our specific lineage. Then we looked at the reasons why the practice might not work, because if you address those reasons, there's no real reason for it to not work. It will work. The practice is designed to work on a human mind in a human body. If you've got that, it's going to work for you. There's no, you know, sometimes people like to think, oh, I'm not cut out for this. That's just another way of, you know, running away. It's not to say that you need to do a tantric practice in particular. A spiritual practice in some way or another addresses these same fundamental things. You know, in my personal experience and in my belief, the tantric path is just, it articulates truths that are relevant to any spiritual path. And this is why you could be, theoretically at least, you could be a tantrika while participating in any religion or none, because tantra is a way of doing religion, or rather a way of doing spirituality. And any specific context can be adapted to it. I mean, like, that's how it was designed, as a kind of spiritual technology. So when you're doing, you know, Shaiva Tantra, you're working with Shaiva mantras and Shaiva deities. When you're doing Buddhist Tantra, you're working with Buddhist mantras and Buddhist deities. There's no reason that someone couldn't do Christian Tantra and do the same kind of practices, but using the Christian imagery and the Christian mantras and so on and so forth. And indeed, someone has written a book proposing a Christian Tantra who studied someone who studied Shaiva Tantra. And that's very interesting. You know, I don't know how good that book is. I haven't read it, but it's very interesting because it's true that this is a practice that can be adapted to any context. It takes some thought and, you know, it takes some expertise to do that. You know, it can't be something you do as an amateur or a hobbyist. That's not going to work. But the point is that what Tantra is articulating here are truths that I think are relevant to any spiritual path, and you can be on your path and be with whatever teachers you have and still learn from the tantric view and the tantric practices. And other people want to go deep into this, both culturally and spiritually. They want to take initiation. They want to study with lineage-holding tantric teachers, and you know, that's available to people as well. Okay. Of course, you know, with any authentic teacher, they're not self-appointed. Their teacher asked them to teach. If you're self-appointed, it, you know, it comes from ego more likely than not, though that's not an absolute rule. then an authentic teacher also has lineage. An authentic teacher can say who their teachers were, who their teachers' teachers were, and you can look at their lineage and see if this feels like the right place for you. And you can work with a teacher for a few months or a few years, and then move on. Or you could be with a teacher for a lifetime, really. Well, having said that, I want to just clarify. The tradition says very clearly, the function of the outer teacher is to lead you to the inner teacher. So actually, if you stay with a teacher for a lifetime, you're just probably dependent and maybe even codependent with your teacher, like you can get with a therapist or anyone. So really speaking, if the practice is working, it's making you more and more independent. And, eventually you don't need the teacher. There comes a time on the path when you're supposed to kill the teacher, meaning sever your emotional dependence, if there is any, and realize, that you've been now empowered sufficiently that everything you need is within you. So ironically, beginners are the most wary of dedicating themselves to working with a spiritual teacher, and beginners are precisely the ones who need it the most, because the advanced practitioner doesn't, usually no longer needs a teacher by definition. Of course, being with a teacher doesn't mean you suspend your critical thinking, your critical faculty. It's just you open yourself to that person, but you still think for yourself. Do you see what I mean? So there's a very fine line there, because for a lot of people, being critical thinkers, that also means closing themselves down. So this is about really opening your heart, but still thinking for yourself. You're not kind of engaged in any blind faith or anything like that. Well, this has been wonderful. I hope, it was the right amount of information for you, not too much, not too little. If it felt like too much, simply review these videos, review the recordings. It's and it'll all sink in, because what I've really tried to do is give you like I said, a fairly thorough orientation to the fundamentals of the orientation of this path. Now, the language, if you've studied in some other tantric lineage, the language I've been using may not be familiar to you, because it is a very diverse tradition. But I would just invite you, instead of saying, oh, well, this is not how my teacher said it, this is not how we do it in the Sri Vidya or whatever other lineage that you're in. I just invite you to kind of feel where these teachings are coming from, where these words are coming from, because I think you'll find that even if the languaging is different in whatever lineage you've studied, what I've been doing, what I've been trying to do is express kind of the spirit of the tradition. And sometimes I was, giving specific teachings from specific lineages, but still, if you kind of have learned from multiple teachers, and if you've immersed yourself in the tradition as a whole, which God knows takes years and years and years and years to do, then you recognize, oh, this is capturing in some sense some of the essence of it, even if the language is familiar or unfamiliar, doesn't matter. So again, for more info, please do read my book, Tantra Illuminated. There's many other great resources out there, of course. I'm not putting myself forward as being better than anyone, God knows. I have received those realm teachings and put them into practice, thank goodness. So I'm not putting myself forward in that way. I'm just, having said that, in the back of my book, there's where I list a bunch of other teachers and a bunch of other books and a bunch of other resources. So that's why it's useful to just refer you to my book, and then it will point you on to further resources itself. So I also have next month a deity yoga course I'm teaching with Ekabhumi, and this is going to be fabulous exploration of 11 powerful deities, both tantric and non-tantric, and we're exploring the deities, of course, as in a non-dual way, as icons of essence, as energetic patterns that express aspects of our own consciousness. So that's going to be very exciting, very rich, very juicy course with songs and stories and mantras and contemplations and homeworks and experiments and all kinds of specific practices that help us engage with these different aspects of ourselves more completely. So that's the Deity Yoga course. You can find out more about that on my website. And finally, in Labor Day weekend, there's coming up very soon, there's a retreat I'm doing in the Santa Cruz area. And I know that's very late notice, but if you're inspired and you're not busy Labor Day weekend, come and join us for the How to Be Free retreat. And if not, maybe next year. We do a retreat every year. So thank you very much to B. Schofield and Meta University for hosting this particular course, and my own very little organization is Mata Mayura Institute, and you can find that link on my page, and as well as I have a page called tantricstudies.org with a K, Tantric Studies with a K, also known as harish.org, same place. So I hope you explore further, and I hope you really enjoyed this course and that it was helpful for you. So thank you very, very much, and be well. May all beings realize their freedom. Hari Om Tat Sat.